Welcome to Giants Nation. I'm your host, Bobby Skinner, here with my co-host, the football Grump, and it is the mega head coach preview episode. We're going to look at all 11 candidates. We're going to give you who they are, talk about them, pros, cons, and I'm very excited, Grump. We're going to give our rankings of 1 through 11. Can I also say, actually, I'm going to save some takes for it, but I hope this list actually does get a little bit longer, unless they're just going to get John Harbaugh. In that case, I don't care. But, how we doing, Grump? It's the head coach candidate preview episode.
Man, I'm ready. This is a ton of stuff to get into. A lot of work went into all the research for this episode, and like you said, there are still a name or two I think that we are interested in adding to this list, um, especially if Harbaugh is going to be like a long drawn out interview around all 32 teams process.
Yeah. So, like, I've got, like, 50 plus pages of notes on these guys, and so we gotta make it, just a good episode and not just just like, what, they run cover 2 at the 13th most rate in the NFL, and that's the difference between him and his time with the Bucks so we're gonna get into all of it. First, we wanna talk about the Harbaugh sweepstakes, which continues to get, like, crazier and crazier by the day without actually getting any movement from John Harbaugh himself. First, this episode was brought to you by some special people. We got JK Sauce. He's got the just kidding sauce. It's not serious, guys. Enzo Baldanza. Enzo, that's the restaurant in Stranger Things that they all say they're going to go to, and they finally see it, and it's just like a normal restaurant at the end. Chris Chapman. This is Elijah Chapman's younger brother. He also plays fullback and defensive tackle. And Zachary LaBaff. Zachary is so clean, so clean because he takes so many LaBaffs. Grump, who are these special people?
These special people went to Enzo's and patreon.com/Giants Nation, where they subscribe for one of the 2 tiers available. And they get to receive stickers in the mail directly from you, Bobby Skinner. They get entered into a monthly free t-shirt raffle. And most importantly, they have access to hang out during recordings of these episodes as they're being recorded and chat with each other on YouTube. And they also get weekly game tape breakdowns throughout the season, which are absolutely worth it. Patreon.com/Giants Nation. They were glad that they did.
They're also going to get some draft player interviews, which one of the reasons I'm excited to get this episode over, Grump, is like, all right, now my head coach candidate preview stuff is over. Now I'm diving into getting ready for the Senior Bowl prospects done, and me and Grump are going to try and do some more interviews with players this year, which will live on Patreon unless the Giants end up getting that player, and then which will make it public. So that's going to be on there. But it's a huge shout out to the Patreon. Oh, and here I'll say this: for the rest of January, they have a 20% off code for the merch store as a thank you for making this all work. We rely on you guys, so you'll be glad you did. So here's what's happened in the John Harbaugh sweepstakes: a million different things without him actually going and doing an in-person interview with the team. We hear, oh, he's studying the quarterback, right? Particularly Cam Ward and Jackson Dart. He's studying the quarterbacks. Okay, so then it becomes the Giants fans versus Titans fans about which quarterback's film is actually going to be better. And it seems like the Dolphins, I don't know if they're in it anymore or not, but they hired their GM on Friday since the last time we recorded, not Chad Alexander, the John Harbaugh relationship. Maybe they're in it. Maybe they're not. Then we start hearing, hey, on Monday, he's going to put together his plan of when he's going to go interview with teams, right? And we're like, okay, so it's getting later in the day on Monday, and we're like, what? Where's the plan? When is he going to start interviewing? Bam, Falcons. We just interviewed John Harbaugh. We're like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. That came out of nowhere. How did nobody report that? Then they come out, oh, it was just a phone call, it was a virtual interview, and people saying, this is really nothing, even though a virtual interview is an interview. I don't think the Falcons, social media in turn went rogue with that. And then we're like, okay, whatever. Like even if that was the first interview with John Harbaugh, I don't think. I guess people are reacting to like every like thing is like this means this, but I didn't really think much of that. Just like, oh, that's just the first place you did a virtual interview, and then it comes out that Chris Mara went to go have dinner with or lunch with John Harbaugh at John Harbaugh's house on Sunday. How do we know that? Because Chris Mara told Ian O'Connor himself. So I don't know what to think about this. We've yet to get an in-person interview. Here's what I have decided in all of this, Crump. I think the Giants have a good of a case as anybody to get John Harbaugh. I also think media some clowns. They surely showed that with down in Jacksonville this week and crying about a 30-second clip. I'm just not believing anything. Like I'm not believing anything. I'm really hoping the Giants get John Harbaugh. I think they have as good a case as anybody, if not the best case for it. Uh, but I'm just not believing anybody on which way he's leaning. Especially hasn't even sat down for an actual interview yet.
I think that this is the kind of thing that the media loves because they're treating it like 9/11. Like, every hour, there's a new bit of information that you must know about. When in reality, I think you can really just take, some time off of Twitter, which is where most of this information is being tossed around, and just look at Twitter once a day, find out what happened, and move on. Because I don't think John Harbaugh is going to make a quick decision on where he wants to go after 18 years of being in the same spot. And I'm pretty sure at the start of this year had no inkling that he was going to be on his way out by the end of this year. So I think that he's going to take his time, cast a wide net. He's got a lot of suitors. You have teams that had head coaches now are firing head coaches to be in the mix. That's a lot of pressure and a lot of bombardment and a lot of stuff to consider. And I don't think that he's going to make a rash decision anyway. So I think that this is the kind of thing that media salivates over and gets us to salivate over, and we really don't need to, because I don't think that anything is going to happen fast. So
Yeah.
I've been hands off for a little while now. If there weren't actual playoff games going on, I don't think I would be on Twitter more than like 20 minutes a day for the last couple days. So.
I think the most interesting thing from a Giants point of view that's like to look at is like, oh, Chris Mara was the one who went there, right? We've had questions of what the ownership dynamic is with Steve Tisch not being overly involved, John Mara, battling with cancer, Joe Shane not being the actual decider of who's the head coach, and then like, all right, who's involved? Is it Tim McDonald who works closely with Joe Shane? Is it Chris Mara? We still don't know, but it is a little bit telling that Chris Mara was the one who went and represented the Giants in that sit down. And like you said, I don't feel like building conspiracies off of that of like, oh, well, this could mean this for Joe Shane or John Mara. It's just kind of, all right, just a mental note to see how things play out going forward with the Giants, with John Harbaugh, and then just everything else in general. Uh, but yeah, the rumors, like you said, it's just like little by little, and I'm like, you know what, I don't care. I'm just waiting until he starts interviewing. You may hear, oh, he likes this or like that, but it's like, all right, well, is that coming from the point of view of the teams? Because I don't think most of them are going to come out saying, man, he really just hated us in that interview. He thinks we're just incompetent. So go Giants, get me damn John Harbaugh, and we're going to break him down as a candidate here in a second. Uh, but I just wanted to talk about the overall John Harbaugh sweepstakes and how nuts it has felt over the last 5 days.
I think the Chris Mara thing is probably the most interesting because it relates directly to the Giants' ownership and what we've been talking about for the last couple months in terms of John Mara's health, Joe Shane's role in the head coaching search, and what's going on in the building. Um, so I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but the fact that Chris Mara is out flying around and going places, I mean, indicates that he's heavily involved in this, which apparently is the first thing he's ever been heavily involved in with the team despite his title. So, I mean, that's definitely something worth noting as we hear more and more news about the entire head coach search process outside of John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh.
John
Um,
Harbaugh, John Harbaugh. That was you reminded me. That was the craziest thing where it's like Adam Schefter's like, the Packers could fire head coach Matt LaFleur. John Harbaugh's agent's father used to be the president of the It's like, how does that work? Hey, my dad used to be the president of the Packers. Won't you become the head coach? So I just made up a fake report using my friends' names of like, you know what? He had a 7-Eleven he GM'd. That person that went there every day, John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh. Uh, so let's get into this head coach candidate preview. I'm excited to see how this thing ends up turning out, how long it takes, but you got to stick with us to the end. If you can't handle me at my Darren Rizzi, you don't deserve me at my John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh. Uh, Overall thoughts before we get into this. We're gonna beat that to death. Uh, um, overall thoughts on this list and takes before we get into each individual, and then we'll do our rankings at the end. Here's what I'll say, and maybe these guys end up getting added to this list. There's a few names that I would like to see be a part of it because I'm all in on Joh Harbaugh, Grump. He's really the only head coach where I'll just celebrate that, right? 18 years of a resume. He's won a Super Bowl. I like the things that he's about. I like the player development. I've loved the coaching hirings and firings that he's made throughout the years. He's replaced coaches well. There's a lot I like about Joh Harbaugh where I will celebrate that. And I think it signals because of how much control he's have, the best chance of real change at 1925 Giants drive of how they do business. So I'll celebrate that. The rest, I'm gonna have my preferences, but I'm more just like, hey, let's see what you do with the Giants. I'm not overly invested in getting my choice of rankings 2 through 5 and getting my 2 over over my 5 or whatever. Because at the end of the day, we're going to give you as much information, but we're not doing interviews. There's a lot of back channeling information that we just aren't able to get. But with that, I just wish I wish Jesse Minter was on this list because, the Chargers defense corner. Number 1, I think he would be number 2 on my list if we were talking about him today. I really think he would. I haven't done the full deep dive into him because he hasn't been added, but I really think he would end up at number 2 for me. I would like Mike LaFleur, the Rams offensive coordinator, on there. I like his background. I think he's a smart guy. And I would have loved some just outside the box. There is some outside the box interviews on here, but I wish there wasn't a special teams coordinator. I wish it was, Luke McCown with the Vikings or even Davis Webb with the Broncos, because we've seen guys make that jump from QB coach to head coach and find success doing it. Andy Reid being one of those guys. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on the list. It's Harbaugh, celebrate. The rest, it's a wait and see, unless you get like Lou Anarumo, and then I will say this is really dumb. This is probably going to go really bad. And I just wish there was a little more youth being interviewed on this list.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with this being like a really wide net. I think that some of the candidates that I was lukewarm on before I did the research on them, I've warmed up to a little bit. But given that there's some names that I would have liked to see on there, Jeff Hafley being one of them. I'd like to see that. Even for some of the names that are on here, I wouldn't hate Mike McDaniel even, even though I'm really not. I don't think it's very likely that I would hire Mike McDaniel or anything like that.
And the Giants have been selling leadership. You get Mike McDaniel, then that's like, what are you?
I can't even picture Mike McDaniel standing for a photo op with John Mara, to be honest with you. But again, for some of the names that are on this list, I mean, I'd rather interview Mike McDaniel and at least just get him and hear what he has to say.
Yeah.
But
I think he's gonna be the top of everyone's OC desire list, right? John Harbaugh. Yeah.
I would think so. Yeah.
Bringing John Harbaugh, I think like McDaniel's everywhere. Like, all right, let's get him as the offense coordinator. I just wish there was more youth on the list because if they miss out on John Harbaugh, I just think the best chance of really turning around the Giants is hitting on one of these younger guys. That's what happens in the NFL more so than you get Stefanski and McCarthy and you kind of feel like you're aiming for like a middle of a road to above average with your head coaching hire. And I think the Giants, there is value in them getting back to middle of the road in the NFL, but it's also not my desire. My standard hasn't changed. I do want to be competing for championships, in the next few years. So let's go through this list. We're going to go number 1, and we're going to go John Harbaugh, the former Ravens head coach, 63 years old. 18 years as the Ravens head coach. He was the second longest tenured coach after his rival Mike Tomlin. 180 and 113 as a head coach, 13-11 in the playoffs, including the Super Bowl victory in 2012. Made the playoffs in 12 of 18 seasons, 8 road wins in the playoffs, was the most in the NFL. In NFL history, coach of the year in 2019. They won the AFC North 6 times. Grump, we don't need to tell you every detail about Joh Harbaugh. He is not a play caller on offense or defense. He has a special teams coordinator background. He has run a very good ship in Baltimore with 2 different quarterbacks who are 2 totally different players, and Joe Flacco, who was a good quarterback, but not a guy who's dragging you to success. Lamar Jackson, finding him, building around him the correct way, which I think is a huge part of him. Lamar is great, so he can drag people to success. the way that they've evolved the defense over the years and found the right talent and put them in the right places, the coaching hires and those guys to go on and find success in other places. I just think John Harbaugh is a slam dunk candidate. I think he really would get a lot of control, which I think the Giants need. I think they need somebody to come in and really challenge them and change their ways, similar to the way, you know, Nick Saban did to Alabama when he got that job, right? He didn't come in and cater like, I love your history, all the things you're good about. He said, nope, change this, and that. It makes people uncomfortable, but it's what can lead the Giants back to success.
I think that John Harbaugh is an outstanding coach at assembling a staff, and I think that he assembles a staff around the talent that he has. And let's not forget that there were question marks for both of those completely different quarterbacks coming into the league. Joe Flacco is an FCS quarterback out of Delaware. Lamar Jackson was another one where it's like, you could see all the and again, like, the arm talent with Joe Flacco coming out of Delaware, throwing in windy and rainy conditions was something that ownership and the GM were convinced he was going to be able to do late in the season in Pittsburgh and in Cleveland on the road, when they needed it most. But still, I mean, there's a lot of question marks behind somebody like that. Joe Flacco himself was considering playing baseball because he didn't think he was going to go to the NFL. And then Lamar Jackson, all the talent in the world, but huge question marks of him just being a true passer. And if that would translate to the next level, to the point where, what is it, like 25 teams passed on him? So, um, there's a lot of ballsiness to John Harbaugh's entire acumen, his resume, etc. Moving on from an offensive coordinator in the middle of a season in which they are having a winning season and to go on to win this Super Bowl. I mean, that's just something I don't know if that I wish I had the time to look it up if that's ever happened before or since, where an offensive coordinator gets fired midseason and that same team goes on and wins a Super Bowl. And then when you have somebody like Lamar Jackson that's going to have to develop a little bit at a time, and just kind of like easing him into the NFL with, uh, Marty Morningwig to Greg Roman, who's gonna work around the run game and kind of attack that way, and then move on to Monken. I think that the way that I was impressed with Brian Dable's ability to scheme an offense around a quarterback, I'm just as impressed with John Harbaugh's ability to build a staff around his players.
Yeah, the building of the staff is the thing that I think is the most impressive. Like you mentioned, they won the Super they fired Cam Cameron, okay, and that was a ballsy move. A lot of guys would have come to that decision and waited until the season was over and said, "It's time to make a change." He said, "You know what, Aaron."
Everybody would have done that.
Yep, and he said, "You know what, it doesn't make sense right now, but I'm gonna do it. This is what I believe, this is why I trust." They go on, to win the Super Bowl. You know, finding, like you said, the offensive coordinators that he had, and then with Marty Mornhinweg, like, they made the playoffs with they had Jim Caldwell, who went and got a head coaching job. Gary Kubiak, got a head coaching job. Mark Trestman, right? Brought in Mark Trestman, probably the worst hires ever made. Fired him 5 games into the second season. Marty Mornhinweg, they go to the playoffs, said, "Hey, you did some good things with Lamar," right? They were averaging over 200 rushing yards per game when Lamar, got inserted into the lineup. But you're not the guy. I'm gonna go in and get Greg Roman. I'm gonna go get my brother's former offensive coordinator from San Fran, bring him away from Buffalo. I'm gonna get Greg Roman, and that worked for 4 years, and then Lamar graduated from that offense. They bring in Todd Monken, they ask him to do better, you know, put more on his plate. He wins MVP the first year, should have won it the second year, in my opinion, but a very close second and probably one of the closer MVP battles with Josh Allen. Um, and then this year didn't have the success that they desired, but, was missing quarterbacks. I think they went 2 and 2 with backups this year. Um, so, like, and again, Lamar wasn't Lamar, when he first entered the league. Like, the passing was extremely raw, right? And they took that and had him as an MVP the next season with Greg Roman. On defense, inherited Rex Ryan, right? But, good coach. Greg Madison, good coach. He ends up going to Michigan. Chuck Pagano goes there, gets the job with the Colts. Good defensive coach. Dean Pease had a lot of success there. Wink Martindale. And then the Wink Martindale thing goes and like, all right, you know what? We've kind of promoted from within. I'm going to change my whole defensive style. I'm going to go get a guy who worked for me in the past. He's my brother's defensive coordinator now, and Mike McDonald. And now we're going to embrace the two high world, the three safety, big nickel type of stuff. And they had the number one defense in year two of that. The last couple of years where Zach Orr haven't been great. I don't think he's going to be bringing Zach Orr over from, as the as the new Giants defensive coordinator. But like hiring the right people and moving on from the wrong people at the right time is such a key part of the job. And dude, he's got an amazing hit rate at that. It's kind of astounding how good of a hit rate he has at that.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually one of those, like, business phrases or whatever is it's less so about hiring the right person, and it's knowing when to fire from the wrong person, that contributes to success most often, because a lot of times hiring is just sort of luck, right? Like, I mean, even John Harbaugh as a head coaching candidate, as someone who's a special teams coordinator, was somewhat unheard of transitioning to the head coach spot. Andy Reid, like you said, jumping up from QB coach into head coach, like, these things are just sort of, you never know until you give somebody a shot sort of situations. And it's a lot of just feeling people out and knowing what they have deep down inside, and not necessarily what their resume is. So their ability to learn, their passion and fire to continue learning, and for the job itself. So yeah, an incredible hit rate, and if you're going to be this CEO type head coach, it's going to be the there's like only two pillars at that point, of what it takes to be a head coach, is your ability to lead and your ability to build a staff. I mean, it's going to be like 90% of your job right there. And then the other 10% is just going to be your game time decision making, which I don't think that he has any sort of bad reputation for, in-game decision making when you consider an 18-year stretch of history.
Yeah, that's some of the things that's been kind of picked at with him over the last few years is that um, the fourth quarter leads. Oh, he blows these leads, or not even fourth quarter, just blowing the double digit leads. I think that's one of the most blown talking points. And I said this before he was even fired, and I just want him as the Giants head coach. 2022 was bad, but a Ravens fan actually even did a study on this. He's like, it's league average, like and the way that they've done that, right? Which you say, hey, he should be better than league average with that, which is a fair point. But 2022, I think, is the outlier year where they did blow a lot of those leads. Um, You say, "Oh, well, he blew the most, 10-point, second half leads and since 1991." Okay, who the hell has been tenured long enough to do that? Like, yeah, it's gonna be either him or Mike Tomlin who's done that, or Bill Belichick. Like, that doesn't move anything for me. Like, nobody else has been around long enough to have those type of issues. Um and defensively, like, I think hiring the right guys, like we said, like, it's produced results. They've had a top 3 scoring defense in half of his seasons. 9 out of 18, they've had top 3. They've been top 10, 13 of 18 seasons. And, like, here's the 6 seasons where they or the 5 seasons where they are outside the top 10. 12th in 2012, the year they won the Super Bowl. 12th the next year. 18th this past season. 19th in 2021. That was the year they got really banged up with, the last year Wink Martindale, their whole secondary got injured. And then in 2015, they were ranked 24th. That's his 5 worst odd defensive seasons over the last 18 years. His 5 worst seasons over the last 18 years is better than any of the Giants' last 2 seasons. So I think he's done it consistently good there. We've talked about offensively, the different types of coaches he's had. And again, I think I want to land on this of like talking about the fit with the Giants. One with Jackson Dart. Um, Number one, I think he's going to be able to find the right offensive coach to build around Jackson Dart. Right. We're going to talk about some guys offensively here in a bit. And it's like, do they fit what Jackson Dart does well? At the end of the day, my counterpoint to that would be Jackson Dart needs to learn how to do some of these things better. But John Harbaugh is a guy who I trust to find the right coordinator to help move Jackson Dart along as he gets better in these things. And we've seen that proof with Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson to a higher extent. So that's important to me. I think running the franchise, he's going to get a long runway, right? Like one of the worries with this, and this is feels like such a it's been years since we've talked about this, is the fact that Joe Shane is on the hot seat, right? No matter what you think, Joe Shane's on the hot seat. Every other one of these head coaches, that really complicates the conversation about the chance that they're going to get, right? With the young coaches that we're going to talk about, I think it makes it really difficult, especially we'll talk about with Shula. It's like he needs specific defensive players to run his defense that are really smart. And I don't know if he's gonna have the time to bring in all those right guys or the GM who's gonna bring with Harbaugh, if it doesn't work with Shane, they're gonna move on from Shane and keep Harbaugh, and it doesn't seem crazy, right? Where if they hire Lou Anarumo and fire Joe Shane after next year and keep Anarumo, that will seem crazy to everybody. With Shane, it's not, right? And hopefully Shane does work with him extremely well and just turns this around and Harbaugh does a good job leading the way. You can't have him just be the GM, like, fully running the draft, but having a big part of that I think is a huge thing. I think it's something the Giants flat out need as somebody to kind of give a culture shock to that building.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we get into these other candidates too, like I'm gonna be it's hard when you have somebody who has just a brief stint of head coaching time, and you look at their hires and their hires, their roster in that short amount of time and what they've had to do. It's very difficult to find out like did they make one mistake that really doomed them, whether it be a personnel decision in the staff or a personnel decision with the roster? And there's a lot of things that can be really critical about, but I don't think that we're going to have to worry about that with John Harbaugh. Like you said, you're going to have plenty of time to get things correct. But I also think of all these guys, that we're going to talk about because John Harbaugh is the sole CEO head coach and he can hire to the strengths of what's already on the roster as he continues to shape it in a way that fits the modern NFL and trends as they change throughout the NFL, which is definitely a thing. You know, he can just hire and fire as those things change, you know what I mean? As the roster continues to build a certain direction, or if the draft and free agency only lets you build in one direction, you can hire in that direction and pivot when you have time to pivot or when you have the assets and resources to pivot. So I think that John Harbaugh, in addition to being just the best candidate out there, I think he also offers some of the most flexibility of any of these candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's he's the guy who gets the most grace if it doesn't turn around right away. Like, and I'm just like I'm bought into him. For more than just you. How do you work with Joe Shane? Do you get a 2 year runway with Joe? Like, it's just like no, like take control. It may take a little time. We're gonna give you that patience, right? We try to be. I try to. I feel like I'm inherently patient. Maybe even to a flaw sometimes. But then I feel better when I'm like, you know what? I never thought that we should trade Andrew Thomas, um, or whatever. Uh, I would love to have a reason to give somebody patience, and I think John Harbaugh gives me plenty of reason to give him patience, but also, an expectation that I think he's going to hopefully turn this Giants team around. All right, John Harbaugh. Let's move on to number 2 on this list for the New York Giants. This feels like it felt like this guy was going to be the Giants head coach. Um, until John Harbaugh, and that's until John Harbaugh was fired. And then that's Kevin Stefanski, the former head coach of the Cleveland Browns, a 43-year-old coach, still pretty young. Um, Two-time coach of the year for the Cleveland Browns, right? 2020 got the Browns to the playoffs for the first time in almost 20 years, and they won a playoff game for the first time in a long time. Even though he missed that game because of COVID, but that's his team. He gets all the credit for it. Um, they won a playoff game, almost beat the Chiefs. 2023, they go back to the playoffs at 11-5. With a defense that was amazing. Offense was an issue. We'll talk about it overall. Um, so he started with 2 coaches of the year, 37-29 through 4 seasons. The last 2 seasons, he's been 8-26, bringing him to 45-56 on his career. There is some things that are said good about Kevin Stefanski, Grump, that I think are inflated by people. And there's also the flip side of like, dude, some of the quarterbacks this guy's had to work with, it's very hard to judge them. The Cleveland Browns have been a total shit show since they, traded for Deshaun Watson, which screwed up everything. So there's a lot of things where it's like I can't fully judge Stefanski on that, but there's also some credit on things that I don't think he really deserves.
Yeah, I mean, starting with the quarterback situation, that's gonna be something that as we go through all of these candidates, is something that definitely factors into their success, obviously, right? And he inherited, Baker Mayfield, who was not quite Baker Mayfield as we know him today. That's definitely a guy who has continued to grow and learn in the NFL as he got experience and gotten better, but he also had Baker Mayfield injured in 2021. And then that Watson trade is the worst trade since the Herschel Walker trade in the entire
Oh,
NFL.
it's worse. It's the worst. I think it might be the worst trade in the history of pro sports.
It's very, very, very debatable. Like it's horrible. And you can even factor in the fact that what they knew at the time of the trade and what they were willing to give up money wise to make it work is just kind of gross on top of it. And we don't know how much Kevin Stefanski had to do with any of that. Um, but I don't really get the sense that Deshaun Watson really fits what Kevin Stefanski likes to do, in terms
Yes.
of what I've seen. So I don't think that Kevin Stefanski had a lot to do with wanting Deshaun Watson that badly added to his roster. Obviously there's a hole when you move on from Baker Mayfield and you need to get a new quarterback. I'm sure, the prospect of getting Deshaun Watson did not make Kevin Stefanski groan and whatever, rub his eyes, but I don't know that he wanted him that bad. And that situation really screwed him up. But you have some good hires in here with Kevin Stefanski. Moving on from Joe Woods and then bringing in Jim Schwartz is a huge, huge shift for
Correct.
the Cleveland Browns, and I think you could even say contributes to one of the Coach of the Year awards that he got.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I want to talk about that Jim Schwartz angle with the Watson stuff. Watson doesn't fit what he does offensively. Now, Stefanski is somebody who kind of like he has an offense that he wants to run, but he really hasn't run it since he first got there, really. They've adjusted it completely. They've had different offensive coaches, which I think has been a little bit of a mess and giving up play calling, which we'll get into. Um, but like the quarterback situation has been a total mess. Um, let's talk about the Jim Schwartz thing because so the first year they coach a year, 2020, they go 10-6, make the playoffs. Or sorry, they went 11-5, make the playoffs. Absolutely deserved coach of the year. The run game was awesome that year. Now, granted, they had a very good offensive line. They had Bill Callahan as the offensive line coach. Like they had all the tools to have a great offensive
But
line.
he hired Bill Callahan.
Exactly. And they adjusted their run game throughout the year when the zone stuff wasn't working as well and incorporated a lot more gap runs. Uh, with Baker Mayfield, they got his footwork fixed a little bit, right? Made him a better deep passer, play action, booting him out, simplifying the offense for him, not putting him in so much just straight drop back, go and chuck it. Um, did really good things with Baker. That year they were 14th in scoring, 10th in EPA per play on offense. And then the next year, 8-9, which is not that bad. Um, but you have the Odell Beckham Jr. drama, right? I don't really put much blame of him on that. That's hard to deal with. Like eventually, I think they did the right thing and just like, you know what, we're releasing you. Now the locker room was torn apart. I don't know how much Stefanski could have tried to fix that. They move on from 2022. He did a pretty good job with Jacoby Brissett and 2022. You know, I remember because that was Daniel Jones the year. Like I remember one of the counter arguments so like Daniel Jones was like, well, look at where Jacoby Brissett is in EPA per play. That year they were 18th in scoring, 12th in EPA per play. 2023, he gets his second coach of the year, Grump. And this is where I'm going to poo-poo him a little bit. They went 11-5. And that defense was amazing that year. I was doing football today. That was an amazing defense. I had so much faith in that defense. I thought they were going to win playoff games because of that defense. They ended up not winning any playoff games. Um, And their quarterback play was terrible, right? PJ Walker, DTR. Actually, I don't know if DTR was that year. PJ Walker, Deshaun Watson got injured in the year. They end up bringing in Flacco. And it's like, look what Stefanski did. He gets the credit for the hiring of Jim Schwartz, right? So he gets that part. Where I think that's one of the worst Coach of the Year awards ever is because I had no expectation for him to make that offense good. But what the expectation should have been is stop turning over the ball at an unbelievable amount. They made the defense that was the clear best defense in the NFL that year. They ranked 14th in points per game because of how much points the offense put on the board for the other team, whether it was just direct pick sixes or, giving the ball to the other team deep into Browns territory. They led the league in like that's where I remember doing the award episode on that show that year on Football Thing and being like, I don't really care that much about Coach of the Year. It's one of the more meaningless awards. But like I don't think he deserves this. Like he did a terrible job coaching offensively. It's not his fault that they weren't good offensively, but you just have that type of turnover issues there. The last 2 years, they've been a mess. I mean, the quarterbacks that he's had the last 3 years: Deshaun Watson, Dorian Thompson Robinson, PJ Walker, Joe Flacco, Jameis, probably their best quarterback, Bailey Zappi, Dylan Gabriel, and Shador Sanders. Uh, I've got no issue with them not having good offenses. In fact, here's the thing where, and I want to ask your opinion on this. This is where it's not necessarily the offensive production and the quarterbacks. One of my worries, Stefanski, is it's more of like, what are you trying to build on offense? What is your backbone? Because they fired Alex Van Pelt after 23. Long time there, move on, right? They bring in Ken Dorsey, gives up play calling halfway through the season, right? Okay, they fire Ken Dorsey. Bring in Tommy Rees, doesn't go so great early on. Then he gives up play calling again to Tommy Rees. That's where I worry a little bit, is like, is he just kind of doing what is being told from above? Like, hey, maybe you should give up the play calling. Like, to do that twice, firing guys. That's where I worry about the offensive turnover staff, and just the fact that he is an offensive coach and their best year on offense was ranked 14th.
Well, I mean, I think it doesn't really matter because it's either one bad thing, two bad things, or the other bad thing, right? So either he made bad hiring decisions with Ken Dorsey and Tommy Rees, or the hiring decision wasn't so bad, but he just can't let go of control and needs to take control of the season. The same way we saw with Brian Dable, always taking control back. Either way, that bodes poorly for me as a head coach candidate, because I don't know whether that, like, what does it mean you're just gonna continue hiring bad offensive coordinators? Does that mean that you just can't relinquish control when things aren't going well? What does that mean? Either way, it doesn't look good. I think the other thing with Stefanski, is I forgot what I was gonna say. So
Well,
then you
I'll
could
say
just
I'll say
respond.
this. Like, looking at like the positives for Stefanski is the fact that the Browns are a total mess and he got 2 winning seasons out of them, right? We just talked about the whole coach of the year, but like he did hire Jim Schwartz to be that defense. Maybe he brings Jim Schwartz with him. I feel like that's become kind of an assumption. I'm not so sure it is. I think there's even a chance the Browns make Jim Schwartz their head coach. Uh, but maybe let's just say, hey, maybe he's brought in one great defensive coordinator. He can do it again. You give him Jackson Dart, who is objectively better quarterback than he's had since 2021. And then even then Baker, wasn't the Baker that we know now. Like, so you give him that, he's got a better offensive surrounding. Like, that offensive line was great in the beginning, but it got really bad over the last couple of years. And not just bad, but injured and bad. So their projected starters ended up missing a lot of time. Uh, and you give him Malik Neighbors, a weapon like that, which necessarily isn't the best fit of, like, he's not like the guy who needs the number one wide receiver. Like, that's where I look at it. And this is where I say I'm less invested in, like, I had Klint Kubiak over him. I'm more so like, you're the Giants head coach. Let's see what you do now. I'm judging because there's a lot of mess that was not his fault in Cleveland. Um, there's a lot of stuff that probably was his fault in Cleveland. Um, but where we could kind of finish off with is how do you think the fit is for Jackson Dart? Because I actually don't think at the moment it is a good fit, even though Stefanski has changed his offenses quite a bit. But what Stefanski wants to do is the outside zone, play action off of it, you know, 2, 3-man routes, where that's just not what Dart is right now. It's probably the weakest part of his game. He has to get better at it. But Dart is kind of better at the drop back. Your footwork doesn't need to be perfectly timed up. Flood the zone, find your man coverage matchup you like. That's kind of where Dart is his best right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I definitely think that there is, some puzzle pieces that don't quite fit yet. And like you said, it's the play action stuff. Um, I will say that I do think that Kevin Stefanski likes the mobility of a quarterback. I don't know that it's necessarily, legitimate run threat, and like part of the offense is the quarterback is someone you have to account for at all times, kind of thing. But I do think that that's something that Kevin Stefanski likes to work with. In general, with like that whole like Shanahan tree. But like you said, it's not currently, the roster's not currently set up for what Stefanski, like, I don't even think, like, at this point with the amount of tight ends that we have that are useful, I don't know. Daniel Bellinger's a free agent, so who the hell knows? But it just doesn't feel like the roster's quite set up perfectly for Kevin Stefanski. I think more so, I'm a little bit worried about, and this is one of the things that the Giants said that they were looking for was like leadership. You have, you know, Jadeveon Clowney issues back in the day, Odell Beckham Jr. issues back in the day. You have Deshaun Watson. You have Shadur Sanders. You have Shadur Sanders going out there. He doesn't have the right plays on his wristband. That's just this year. You have the Dylan Gabriel starting over him. Uh, Nonsense.
But I don't think that's nonsense. I think they drafted
It's not
Gabriel.
really nonsense, but I'm
I
just saying it was drama that I don't think that he was able to quash very well, and I don't think any of it's easy drama to quash. But you have similar personality. First of all, the Giants are in a lot of disarray as well. You have Abdul Carter not going to meetings and stuff like that. Other rumblings. It it is a worry for me. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, it's a worry because it wasn't shown as some great strength there, and I know it's like, oh, he didn't fully lose the locker room, and I think we've learned that coaches who aren't super hard on their players, they don't quote unquote lose the locker room because there's nothing to lose them over. They're just kind of showing up and doing their job. So you mentioned three incidents. The Odell one, I give him a pass. I'd like to hear more of that dynamic, but like we know better than anybody. Sometimes you give a guy a mega contract and then he goes on TV without telling anybody. Like, and like that was bullshit from Odell. Um, the Shador thing, like, I think he actually handled Shador I think he handled what was basically an impossible situation, never really stepped in it with the Dylan Gabriel should just bring in Shador in itself, obviously brings in a media circus. It's not necessarily Shador's fault, but it just does. In fact, I watched some of those interviews, and it's kinda sad some of the ways Browns reporters would try and bait the kid. Um, the Clowney one, I don't really have a take on it, but it is one of my funniest moments where I actually remember where I was. It was I was up in New York for, the, uh, the Giants playoffs, and I was actually at a diner with my now wife, and she was, like, almost annoyed with me because it came out that Clowney was, like, upset with them, and he's like, "I feel like they favor Myles Garrett over me," and I'm just, like, dumbfounded. I was like, "Yeah, dude, he's fucking Myles Garrett, and you're Jadeveon Clowney. Of course they favor everybody in the world favors Myles Garrett over you. Like, what land" it's just one of my favorite, like, just lack of self-awareness NFL moments in my, uh, life where it's like, "Yeah, they favor Myles Garrett over me." It's like, "Yeah, dude, everybody would. Your family might, favor him over you." I just
Yeah, I
wanted to
mean,
tell that story.
I I wouldn't be throwing a fit if Kevin Stefanski ends up being the head coach, but I definitely have some concerns that I see, those are hurdles that are already set up for him that he's gonna have to clear the second time around. And remember, Kevin Stefanski was a one-year offensive coordinator in Minnesota, and then he became a head coach for the Browns. He managed to hold on to that job for 5 years despite a lot of the things that we just went through. Um, Maybe there's lessons learned there, right? Maybe there's an Excel file on his computer called lessons learned, and he can come in here and now he knows how to navigate all those waters, right?
I have a take, and, it's a legitimate take, and you're gonna have to wait for that because we got a new sponsor, baby. We got Factor. Factor is on board. They were on board with the old show, and they are now on board with the new show. So go show them support. You wanna eat better, but, you don't have the time, you don't have the energy to make it happen. Factor doesn't ask you to meal prep or follow recipes. It just removes the entire problem. 2 minutes, real food, done. Um you're not failing at healthy eating, you're failing at having 3 extra hours every night. Factors already made by chefs, designed by dietitians, and delivered to your door. You head for it in 2 minutes and eat. So, personal, kind of story. I'm trying to get back in shape, get in better shape. When I get to training camp, I wanna be, nice and thin, like Grump and just, I'm trying to get in better shape. But sometimes, especially when you're doing head coach candidate previews, it's like you don't have time to cook, whatever. Factor, showed up this week. They've been huge, and I think they're gonna help me get back in shape. So Factor's been also it's made by chefs. They lean proteins, colorful vegetables, whole food ingredients, healthy fat, like the stuff you'd make if you had the time. It doesn't have artificial sweeteners, refined sugars. We know how on this show how we're very against artificial sweeteners. That's a huge part of what we do. My favorite go-to are the cilantro chicken. That's my go-to. I like to smoke a smoky Gouda chicken with cauliflower. I'm a big cauliflower fan. Um, and they have so much variety, right? Like me personally, I don't eat pork. They got plenty for me, which, there's some other, meal services when you go and look at the menu, it's like, oh, this really cuts it out. They have 100 rotating meals every week, high protein, calorie smart, Mediterranean, GLP-1 support, ready to eat salads, new Muscle Pro collection for strength and recovery. You pick what fits your goals, healthier eating, calorie management, more protein, whatever you're actually trying to do, they're going to do it. It's always fresh, never frozen, which it shows up at your door, not frozen, which is pretty cool. No prep, no cleanup, 2 minutes, no worrying about cooking. So, this is the kind of the best option for me, someone who's, very busy and on the go with, trying to do this damn Giants thing. So head to factormeals.com/Bobby50 off and use code Bobby50 off to get, guess what? 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. Breakfast offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchases. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. I'll be glad you did.
That is a ridiculous deal. You'll be glad you did.
Breakfast. It's a great deal to get free breakfast for a year. So go check out Factor. Supporters of the show, try it out. If you don't like it, then don't continue doing it. But I think you'll like the way you look. I guarantee it. Um, That's gonna be my new favorite things. Just keep using other slogans. All right. Let's hit the third of the big three of the former head coaches. There's other former head coaches, and that's somebody who could probably use some Factor. That's Mike McCarthy, our guy, Mike McCarthy. So this is before we get into him individually. This is the take I have. So we just listed a lot of negatives with Kevin Stefanski, and we're gonna get to some coordinators, and we're not gonna have this big list of negatives. You want to know why? Because Kevin Stefanski has done the job. So that means his flaws as a head coach, we've gotten to see. There is flaws about Chris Shula and Klint Kubiak and Lou Anarumo that we don't know about because they have never been an NFL head coach. We don't know who they would hire and fire and what they would deal with an issue when there's a linebacker who's pissed off that, Aaron Donald is getting more playing time than him. Uh, so that's it. So when you hear us talking about the recent head coaches, they may be the best people for the job. They're also going to have the bigger negative list, just because we've seen them do it. So there's going to be more of that conversation with them. But let's talk about Mike McCarthy, 62 years old, coached the Packers for 13 years with 1 Super Bowl and 9 playoff appearances, coached the Cowboys for 5 years with 3 playoff appearances. A very good record, 174, 112, and 2, a Super Bowl, 11 and 11 in the playoffs. His QBs have been Brett Favre for 2 seasons, Aaron Rodgers for 11 seasons, Dak Prescott for 5 seasons. So, like, your worst go of it being Dak for 5 years sounds pretty nice. But here's a defense I'm gonna make for Mike McCarthy because, like, oh, he's just had these great quarterbacks. One, he developed Aaron Rodgers, right? It's kind of ironic that he was actually the offensive coordinator for the 49ers when they passed on Rodgers for Alex Smith. Never forget when they didn't have a pay scale for rookies, Rodgers said he would play for the 49ers for less. Um, but anyways, he developed him. Here's a stat that I thought was pretty interesting about Mike McCarthy. As much as he's had great quarterback plays, his record with backup quarterbacks is 19-24-1. That's like pretty damn good to have 19 wins, and a tie with 44 games with backup quarterbacks. Like, this isn't meant to just, be an indirect shot, but, like, Joe Shane's returning as GM with 22 wins in 68 games, and McCarthy's got almost that many wins and 24 less games with backup quarterbacks. So we'll kind of talk about him. He's had a lot of offensive success. Coaching hires are a question mark, even though there's been some good ones. But McCarthy, I mean, he's brought points everywhere he goes, Grump.
I think if an alien came down to Earth, or I guess I think if you asked AI to compile, like, the best coaching candidates by, um, pure numbers and stuff like that, there's no reason Mike McCarthy shouldn't be near the very top, but I think it's more of the details with Mike McCarthy that are negatives for him. But yeah, I mean, the pure numbers are really, really good. I mean, right? Like, what he's been able to do in Green Bay was nothing but success for a really, really long time. The Giants have had far worse failures go on than what he was dealing with in Green Bay before they moved on from him, goes to Dallas. And even then, like the failures are so short lived before they decide to move on from him. Um, I I think that a lot of what works against Mike McCarthy is I think that he's a little bit rigid, right? And I think that he has not adapted too much to the game. He's stayed very much within his own system as he's moved around. You look at the hirings that he's had, and it's the same guys coming back around. Like
Basically,
Joe
just
Philbin,
hires fired head coaches as DC and hopes it works.
and that's one of the things that really worries me is like, some of his best hires are like defensive coordinator hires where it's just like they're all this is Mike Nolan, Dan Quinn. Um, I just it I can see like there's a lot of rigidity there, and I don't see a lot of growth. He even kind of like said like in the year where nobody actually wanted to hire him, where the Jets took Adam Gase over him. And then I think someone like asked to interview him and then didn't interview him. The one year he took off, he said that he like went around and watched every single play, and then like came out and said like, yeah, actually I didn't do that.
Yeah, so that's what worries me about McCarthy is like, are you just a fraud? Like, there's certainly good things about him, but like personality wise, like he's told Jerry, I watch every game of Cowboys film, and then and his opening press conference, like, yeah, sometimes you just lie to get a job. It's like, what? Like, even number one, that's not good. Number two, keep lying about it, idiot. Uh, they did like that off season like coaching club where they like, oh, they dive into analytics and studying this. And, like, had ESPN did this whole piece on it, and it was like, yeah, they got together, like, once a month or, like, once or whatever it was and kinda just talked about going for it on 4th down. So when he got the job with the Cowboys, like, "Oh, he's so aggressive on 4th down." I was like, "Alright, we didn't need to do an analytics, like, convention to say, 'Hey, maybe go for it more on 4th down.' Just look at Twitter every day, or every game." So, there's, like, that type of stuff. The offensive style, right, is a lot of isolation routes, right? We've lived a little bit of that with Ben McAdoo. It's, get the ball out quick and on time. They've made it a little more aggressive with, Dak and they've, coined it the Texas Coast instead of the West Coast offense. Um, but it's like, hey, we're gonna run slants, we're gonna force feed our wide receiver one. The CD Lamb usage was insane. So Malik Neighbors get ready to have 140 targets. Plus, if when you come back, if Mike McCarthy, and he's never really had like a very good rushing attack either. Like you would think in 18 years he would have that. Like he's had a 3 top 10 rushing offenses in 18 seasons, with the highest being ranked 7th in 2013. Um, the only time he's been top 10 in a rushing attempts is 2022, and that was with Kellen Moore, and they fired him after that. Like his best rushing efficiency year was 2018 when he was fired by the Packers. They were dead last in attempts that year. So it's like those are the question marks. But yes, he's had good quarterback play. He's had 4 number 1 offenses in his time, twice with the Packers, twice with the Cowboys. And one was after they fired Kellen Moore. So like with the right quarterback and some offensive pieces, like he can put up points. I don't necessarily blame the playoff failures on him. I think Dak jokes in the playoffs. I think that's legitimately part of it, even though McCarthy contributes to that as well,
Yeah.
with having some like predictable isolation like defensive coordinators can, you know, pounce on that type of stuff. So I, here's my pro Mike McCarthy take. In a world where Kevin Stefanski is a lot of people's slam dunk number 2, I'm not sure why Stefanski's clearly ahead of him.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I mean, in 18 years as head coach, he has 11 postseason wins. He's won 8 division titles. There's certainly things that you can say that are negative, though. Eh, I think that Mike McCarthy and Kevin Stefanski, maybe Mike McCarthy got really lucky to start his time as head coach to transition very smoothly, by the way, from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, where you have Aaron Rodgers, who's an incredibly talented quarterback to begin with, who's had a super competitive mindset that's absolutely necessary to be a quarterback in the NFL, and he doesn't even have to play for like 3 years, or something like that. So, I mean, like,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen anymore. So is it possible that Mike McCarthy and Kevin Stefanski are the same guy with completely different starting situations? I don't know. I think that they're a lot closer than people make them out to be, but there are definitely some things with Mike McCarthy that will make you shake your head. And
And
have we
that's
been fans of the Packers or the Cowboys, there are playoff games, right, where we have Dak Prescott running a quarterback draw with 14 seconds left, and you pretty much forfeit the game because of poor time management. Same thing with Green Bay choking against the Seattle Seahawks, where they have a huge lead in the fourth quarter, and they go run, 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 and get like negative yardage on all of them. And Seattle scores a touchdown, recovers an onside kick, and they go ahead and win the game. And you're left there in shock. I mean, if that happened here with Brian Dable, I mean, like, we wouldn't hear the end of it. So
well, you did
there are
hear,
definitely things with Mike McCarthy.
and that is the counterpoint to what I just said about the Stefanski thing. Is like, well, if he was the Cleveland Browns head coach, and Stefanski got Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott, be a lot different. Now, Stefanski ideally runs a different defense than honestly what even Rodgers and Dak want to run, so he'd have to adjust to that. But I think he'd have a better time adjusting to that than Deshaun Watson and PJ Walker. Um, but the counterpoint is like, yeah, but we've seen McCarthy do it, right? Like, so he's had the good he didn't make these good quarterbacks have the 15th ranked offense, right? They were always a top offense in the NFL with these good quarterbacks. He was never holding them back. Um, Another negative for McCarthy is the hiring. The defensive coordinator hiring has been pretty damn bad. Like, Dom Capers was the DC for 8 of the 13 seasons in Green Bay. It obviously started well, but it got worse and worse and worse. Then they move off him for Mike Pettin, who, didn't do, like, they were only top 10 twice in, in that time period, with him. Bob Sanders was the DC for the first 3 seasons, two of which were pretty disappointing. And then with the Cowboys, Mike Nolan was god awful that first year. I remember that Cowboys defense very specifically doing film work on them, and it was the most undisciplined defense I've ever seen. I've never seen that team just not give a shit about rush lanes, and just let teams run all over them and fall. Like, me, I'm anti trick play guy. Like the Dallas Cowboys that year, you could run 25 trick plays and they will all work. But then his best hire is Dan Quinn. Like, that ends up being his best hire. Um, and then even on the offensive side, the hires aren't like overwhelming. Like, his best OC is probably Kellen Moore, who he fired. Then you get Brian Schottenheimer with the Cowboys. Joe Philbin was the only guy who got a head coaching job underneath him.
Ben McAdoo,
Yeah, but McAdoo went from,
tight
tight
end
end
coach.
coach
Yeah, I
to,
get it. But
he did that through the Giants, and even then Ben McAdoo's like, so he's really never put together like a offensive coach who went and learned from McCarthy and is doing really well in the NFL either.
yeah, I mean, like, you can definitely look at some of the defensive head coach, like former head coach to defensive coordinator hires that he does, and be like, but this is actually smart, right? And that's fair, right? You can definitely say like, well, getting Dan Quinn, but it seems when you look at the track record of it being Dan Quinn, Mike Zimmer, Mike Nolan, Mike Pettin, aside from everyone being named Mike for some reason, it doesn't look like it's like genius thinking. It looks like it's lazy thinking. It's like, well,
Yes.
you've got this. You go ahead. It sounds like you know what you're doing. Go run your defense, and I'll run my offense, kind of thing. And it works like 1 out of 4 times. There's some other sneaky ones in there that are sort of involved in Mike McCarthy's past, like Patrick Graham. Was hired by John Fossil is a pretty good hire. I don't
Yeah,
know if
that might be his best coordinator hire is John Fassel, special teams coordinator.
Yeah. Al Harris is in there somewhere as well. Um, I think Al Harris has had an upward trajectory anyway. I think that at some point Al Harris is going to be a head coach somewhere. Um, maybe not the NFL, but
Al Harris, the former Packer, right?
yeah, I guess yeah.
So even then, it's like, going
I
to the
Fair enough, fair enough. But yeah, I mean, like Joe Philbin still finds his way underneath Mike McCarthy, and he was an absolute catastrophic failure as head coach. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, there's a lot of things with Mike McCarthy that just feel very much like rigid. This is how I do things, and we're going to live with it. And you've seen it. Like, yeah, they won a Super Bowl, and then you look back at it, and it's like, okay, you won a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. Congratulations in a division where For a long time, Minnesota had nothing going on. Detroit had nothing going on, and Chicago was up and down. Very, very different from John Harbaugh, who had to go against, the Andy Dalton years with Cincinnati were a lot tougher than I think people are going to remember. And Mike Tomlin every single year. The AFC North and the NFC North were not nearly the same level of
Yeah,
competition.
with better court, and if anything, it's disappointing that Rodgers didn't get more than one Super Bowl.
Absolutely.
Um, all right, let's move on from Mike McCarthy and let's get our first coordinator on the board, and let's look at Chris Shula, Rams defensive coordinator, 39 years old. It's the grandson of legendary head coach Don Shula, the nephew of former Giants offensive coordinator Mike Shula, and son of 90s head coach, Bengals head coach David Shula. So Don, really good job with you. Hopefully you did a better job with your grandson than you did your sons. No offense. Sorry, that was mean. Shula is like a Sean McVay lifer. If there is any Sean McVay lifers, like he's moved his way up from the Rams ladder. And something that I like about him is he's essentially coached every part of the Rams defense except for the defensive tackle group specifically. Like he was the assistant linebacker coach, then outside linebacker, back to inside linebacker, then DB, back to linebacker, and then defensive coordinator. So again, the only coach position he did was defensive tackle. He was the pass game coordinator, so handled all the back end at one point. The pass rush coordinator, which is like setting up your stunts and getting you and self in units, so working with the defensive tackle group, and then obviously the DC. He was he lived with Sean McVay early on, by the way, because they were freshmen together at the University of Miami of Ohio. Um, so again, that's something I really like is that he has had his hand in basically every position on the defense. We're trying to not get too into like schematics. He does this. I just like what he does. Like he has a clear principle of what he likes to do. Um, but he also like adjusts within it, right? Like you know how a lot of teams are getting in heavy personnel and they're throwing at it, right? And they're like, "Oh, we want to get teams in base defense and get them heavy and then make their linebackers have to cover a lot of pass defenders and they're not as good at that, right?" And then some guys like Jesse Minter or Mike McDonald are like, "Hey, we're just not going to get out of nickel though. We're going to stay in nickel. We have a nickel defender who can play the run like a linebacker and that's how we're going to attack it." They don't have that guy. What I like about what Shula does is he does a little bit of both. He's like, "I'm going to get in base defense, but I'm going to keep two high safeties. So you're not going to get those easy, crossers against me. But I'm also not going to be so light that I'm a total rush defense liability." And he's gotten better, right? 2024, they were middle of the pack defense. They were very bad as a rushing defense. This year, they've been 10th in points per game, 7th in EPA per play, got to middle of the pack as a rushing defense, 5th in turnovers. And they're doing it, Grump, with not not like high priority pieces, right? They're the second cheapest defense in the NFL. They have 2 first-round picks on that defense, Jared Verse, and then Commanders cast off Emmanuel Forbes. Um, and I just like what he's doing. He runs the most dime personnel, 6 DBs in the NFL with those 3 safety looks, with the 3 corners. I think he's a smart defensive mind. Is it his time to be a head coach? Is he the guy that saved the Giants? Those are questions I have, but I'm very confident that he's a very smart young defensive coach and he's forward thinking. And I like the idea of him getting an offensive coach when he's been under Sean McVay for all these years.
Yeah, man, I get the same inkling that, like, it seems very early for him. He's had a very quick pathway up. It seems like he's belonged every step of the way. Um, but I get the sense that he's super passionate about football and will dive into anything and everything. And you get that sense when you see how much he bounced around, just like you said, outside linebackers, passing game coordinator and DBs, pass rush and linebackers, and then defensive coordinator. That 2024 year as defensive coordinator, by the way, is the first year that they had to go without Aaron Donald in the middle. That was his first year as defensive coordinator. So imagine that as a super young guy, whatever, I guess not super
And
young,
can I
32
say,
years old, but
add this on top of it? We're going to get to Raheem Morris later. I think he well outperformed Raheem Morris in the same position with the Rams. And like I said, and less investments. Obviously, Raheem Morris was part of one of those gap years, but um, so I think he's done that. I want to ask you this. You were at the Panthers-Rams game, and Shula's defenses have given up some points to end the season. Was there anything that you just didn't like about it? I guess it's a very low blitz rate, 31st this year. Um, like, was there anything from that defense that you were, like, alarmed seeing in person?
No, nothing that stuck out in particular. I'm gonna say, like, that was a game I went strictly to enjoy. It was also a very weird game.
Son of a
So
bitch.
there were there was rain in the forecast for, like, kickoff, and then it never rained, not even, like, maybe 3 drops for the entire game, but it was ridiculously windy at times too. So, I mean, not quite as windy as the Eagles game, where, like, you saw, like, just shit flying all over the field and the goalposts were all over the place, but it was really, really windy at times, and there was, like, I went out to grab some food and, like, in the concourse, there was just junk flying everywhere. So I think that that changes a lot of stuff. I think that Carolina came out with a game plan that they weren't necessarily ready for, and it was a lot of, like, nothing, 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 and then drives. But, nothing, like I said, in particular for that game, nothing truly stuck out, in particular. But when I look at just the defenses that he's coached from 2017 under Wade Phillips all the way through Raheem Morris and then onto his own, I see a lot of sacks and I see a lot of interceptions. And it's all the way through. There's some years, the 47 sacks this year.
Yeah, so, like, they rotate the way the thing I enjoy watching the film, bro, the most on is, like, coverage rotations. I think it's so cool, um, and sim pressures is one of those things I don't like, and what sim pressures are is basically showing, like, the 4 you're gonna rush with, 1 drops out, you send the nickel corner, whatever. I'm not a huge fan of those, but what I am a huge fan is what he does is he sim pressures, which, again, you're not guaranteed that you're gonna get to the quarterback fast. They may pick it up, and you're just rushing 4 with a lesser fourth. But what he does is he rotates the coverage on top of those simulated pressures. So what you're hopefully doing is speeding up the quarterback's clock while giving a coverage that inherently slows down a quarterback's clock as well too. So, like, those are the things that I like about him. I think he's good. And again, he's not a nickel lifer, right? He uses nickel defense at, one of the bottom rates of the NFL because he knows I don't have that nickel defender who allows me to just live in this. Maybe he would change if he does it, but, like, again, I'm not gonna, when they get heavy, I'm not gonna just stack the box, put a extra defensive lineman on, bring the safety down. No, I'm gonna get heavy too, and I'm gonna keep the 2 safeties high. So I just think he's smart. Obviously, Sean McVay's influence. I know Sean McVay's an offensive coach, but I just think he's the best head coach in the NFL, and I think he's smart, and Chris Shula has been very close to him, and I think that's a huge thing. The the counter for him is it just may not be the right time for the Giants because offensive coaches have a better ability to just bring their scheme in and make it look good right away. Defensive coaches don't, especially when he plays the style that he does. If the Giants don't address the defensive tackle and linebacker group, he may be the smartest guy in the world, and teams just run the ball on us, right? And we're dealing with another defensive coordinator who is, giving up a bunch of rushing yards, and he doesn't have the pedigree of having number one run defenses like the last two. So that's a worry. And it's like he might add, like, hey, we add this safety in the third round and this outside linebacker, or, this corner, whatever. But, like, there's a worry he just doesn't have the amount of time to do that before the Giants are like, hey, we're 7-10 or 8-9 in year 6 of Joe. Like, that's my worry with him is I would like him to get a little bit of a longer runway than he might get with the Giants being such a young coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a huge thing, right? The Giants are a complete build from the bottom up. Like, you need coaches for the offense, defense, and probably special teams. Maybe you keep what's his face?
Michael
Was it
Gabriel.
Gobriel? Yeah. So, but I I agree too because it's also he doesn't have like this system in place where he's been defensive coordinator for a really long time and has all these connections of guys that he can bring with him and fill in all the gaps and just be like, you know what I like to do. I've taught you. We've worked together. Now I'm going to teach you exactly how I want it done or whatever. And I can be hands off. Like I can't imagine him like
So
not being involved in defense. You know what I mean?
yeah. Which again, like you said, that's a great point. Like, even though Jesse Minter hasn't been in the NFL, like, what he had the ability to do is like, I'm gonna go get all these Ravens guys. Like, I'm gonna get all these guys who are a little older with the Ravens. I'm gonna do my thing. Even Dan Quinn, I know the defense has not been good, but one thing I thought that he was smart was in his first year, is like, we don't have a ton, we're not gonna spend all this money, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a bunch of guys in my own image, and it's gonna be a Dan Quinn light defense. I'm gonna get Dorrance Armstrong. I'm gonna get Jeremy Chin and Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner, and we're not gonna be talented. We're gonna be a little slower, gonna be older, but I'm gonna get guys that I know play my defense the way I like it. So like you said, he doesn't have that wealth of ability to go do that, especially when the Rams are an extremely young defense at his time there. And they were very veteran laden before that of guys who aren't in the league. All right. So Grump went to the Panthers Rams game and he didn't scout the opponent very well. And you know what? If you want to just go to a game and enjoy it and not scout the opponent, go to SeatGeek. And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you about today's sponsor, SeatGeek. I know I'm not supposed to talk about how expensive tickets are, but I really wanted to go to the Miami National Championship game against Indiana. And they were expensive, but see, I compared them to all the other ticket sites, and SeatGeek had the best deal. So if you want to go and do it, do it. And again, the NFL playoff games, if you're in the area of one of those, go get it. SeatGeek is the number one rated ticketing app with over 35 million downloads. There's more than 70,000 events listed on SeatGeek, concerts, sports, festivals, and more. You know, you have the college football final, you have the NFL playoffs, the NBA is in full swing. Go check out an NBA game. And you can get World Cup tickets on SeatGeek. Guess what? World Cup final, East Rutherford, New Jersey. So I've used it for every event I've been to. I use it for the Cheez-It Bowl. And SeatGeek has your back. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know you're getting a good deal. Look for the green dots. Green good, red bad. Plus, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee. And of course, I have a code for you guys. You can use code Bobby2026 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets with promo code Bobby2026. Remember, it's a new year. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. You'll be glad you did it. Which Grump did use that code for the Panthers Rams game. On a serious note, I wasn't expecting you to scout out Chris Shula. How was the Rams Panthers experience?
It was a ton of fun, dude. It was a lot of fun. You know, it'd be really, really cool to go to a Giants playoff game where there's an atmosphere like that. But also, it's just incredibly weird to go to a playoff game and it's like 70 degrees. I walked from where I live down there, and which is just a cool experience in general because this is a city stadium. So, like, as you get closer, so like, you know, starting out from where I was walking, you might see like one dude in Panthers gear walking, and then like every couple of blocks, like 5 or 6 more people come until you like hit an auxiliary parking lot and there's like a whole tailgate going on. There's a couple bars on the way where there's like, you know, a whole party going on. Then the streets get blocked off. It was a ton of fun. The game, you know, I went in there being like, this is as high as it's gonna get, like walking in, you know what I mean? Panthers and Rams. I have the Rams picked to win the Super Bowl. So I don't think this is even gonna be close. And then you have the game the way it went too. I mean, what a game I got to go to.
Yeah,
I
that was
thought with
nuts.
that blocked punt and going in and the go-ahead touchdown in the corner of the end zone, that all happened like right in front of me. If right in front of me was like a section and a half below me. Um, but it was a ton of fun, really good vibes. And I gotta say, for such a crappy way to lose, the crowd really, you know, handled it in stride. So it was a ton of fun, and I can't wait to go back to another one, hopefully for a Giants game.
Panthers fans felt like they were excited after that game more so than mad they lost. And that's actually some advice from that game. Do not hire any special teams people from the Rams uh, line because they fired one guy this year and the replacement hasn't been very good either. So don't do that, Chris Shula. All right, let's talk about the next guy, and that is Seahawks offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak. Once again, a son of a Super Bowl winning coach. Shula was a grandson, but the bloodline of a Super Bowl winning coach. He's the son of Super Bowl champion head coach Gary Kubiak, who was a Mike Shanahan disciple. Not a Mike Shanahan disciple. He was the Mike
The
Shanahan disciple, actually. His resume over the years: Vikings QB coach from 2019 to 20, got the OC job in 21 when Stefanski left. Or no, actually, no, that was after Stefanski left. Kubiak, his dad got it the year after he left. Broncos QB coach passing game coordinator in 2022, became the 49ers passing game coordinator in 23, finally got the Saints offensive coordinator job in 24, and then when they fired Dennis Allen, he became the Seahawks offensive coordinator this year. Like he said, like I said, he's the son of Gary Kubiak. You know, Kubiak was always backup QB for a lot of years and then became the offensive coordinator for Shanahan. So Kubiak is kind of leading the way on like these heavy formations, play action, trying to get chunk plays out of the passing game, but a commitment to the run game even though their run game has not been good for the Seahawks, there is a commitment to it, and that sets it up. Um, he's had success this year, right? They're third in scoring in the NFL. And they turn over the ball quite a bit. We'll talk about like individually. I think even though when you look at the Saints, Grump, you're gonna say, oh, they're 24th in scoring, 23rd in passing, 14th in rushing. Um, I actually think he did a very good job with the Saints.
I mean, you look through the you look at Mike McCarthy and see like, oh wow, he had Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and then Dak Prescott, and then you look at what Klint Kubiak has dealt with, like Kirk Cousins. You have a lot of mid, right? Like Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, whenever his arm was attached to his body, and then Sam Darnold. I happen to think a little bit more highly of Sam Darnold than a lot of people, but I certainly don't think that he's something that's like, oh, I can't wait to work with Sam Darnold. So I think that he's done a really, really good job with what he's been handled, and that 2024 New Orleans Saints team is hot garbage.
Yeah, so they started out so hot and then kind of fizzled out, but like they were running the ball and they were play actioning like crazy. And you say, oh, they're 24th in scoring. Okay, but with Derek Carr at starting quarterback, they went 5-5. Uh, and with 24.5 points per game. This is with Alvin Kamara, who was a great player at one point. He's probably not that, but he's still a good player. It was his most efficient year since 2020, was with Klint Kubiak. So, the last 5 seasons, his most efficient year was with Klint Kubiak. And they had a terrible offensive line for the entire season. Their offensive line was terrible, just flat out terrible. Chris Olave missed 9 games. Rashid Shaheed missed 11 games. Like, I'm going to give you a little trivia on this. Hopefully, you didn't watch my Clint Kubiak video, or hopefully you did, but for the sake of trivia, who were the top 3 receivers for the Saints that year?
I think you actually quizzed me on this for our last episode that we did together, but it's Jawan Johnson, Foster Moreau, and then I don't know who 3 is.
Alvin Kamara was 2. Foster Moreau was the number 3 receiver for that team. So, like, it obviously went terrible with Spencer Rattler and having Kevin Winston at, wide receiver and shit. Demarcus Robinson was like their no, it wasn't even it was Aldrich. What was the Cedric Robinson, I think. Was that
Okay.
whatever? Cedric Wilson, I can't remember. It's their wide receivers sucked, is the point that I'm trying to make though. And they weren't like deficient. They were just bad when they had all of that together with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. When the Carr, you know, they were a solid team. With the Seahawks, they've been really good. Like they're 24th in yards per carry, but there's a commitment to the run game. They're 10th in rushing yards despite that. And then they're 8th in passing yards. What do you think is helping them be such an efficient passing offense where they're second in net yards per attempt? That commitment to the run game and the way they're able to play action off of it. And Darnold's helping and hurting a little bit, where he's completing the deep ball at 58%, which is second best in the NFL. And there's some tough throws he's making. But they also have a ton of turnovers as well, too, right? Darnold has the second most interceptions in the NFL with 15. They've lost the most fumbles, which I don't put that much on the offensive coordinator because the Saints only had 7 the season before. So like a lot of people thought the Seahawks offense was going to get worse. Like, oh, they lost DK Metcalf, they lost Geno Smith. Everyone loved Geno Smith, and they've gotten absolutely better. And now they're the number 1 seed. They're having the number 1 defense certainly is a big part of that. But that offense has made it possible for them to be as good as they are.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's sort of similar to what we were saying about Mike Kafka having this nonstop commitment to the run game towards the end of the year as interim head coach, where it it we weren't really rushing well, but by the end of the game, you have decent numbers, and it seemed like the commitment to the run game is what ended up opening stuff up later. And you weren't rushing poorly either. It was just somewhere in between. You just didn't give up on it. Now, where it's totally different, I think, is just the entire setup of it. You have a lot of 2 tight end sets, and stuff like that, where you really kind of trying to run the ball, use your play action, and then get your deep ball success rate super through the roof.
Yeah.
Which is not really what we saw with Mike Kafka, but then again, Mike Kafka's sort of running the Brian Table offense. We don't know anything about Mike Kafka, so very, very interesting. And I think it's really impressive what Klint Kubiak has dealt with throughout his entire time. He's worked with Russell Wilson, um, Kirk Cousins, and Derek Carr, and then Sam Darnold. Like, none of those are, like, names that you're just like, "Well, of course he had success with him." Like, just none of them.
Yeah, and, like, you just wanna see something like is, like, play action and deep ball rate are 2 things that can be big outliers from year to year, and you don't, like, wanna, dive too much into it. I'm gonna show Derek Carr 24 and then Sam Darnold 25. Darnold had the second highest differential in yards per attempt for play action, basically saying they average this amount many more yards, than they do straight drop back. Second highest, um, at 4.1. Derek Carr had the highest in 2024 at 4.3. Identical. Derek Carr used play action at the 12th highest rate, Sam Darnold at the 11th highest rate. Carr averaged 16.8 yards per completion. Darnold averaged 16.8 yards per completion. Derek Carr was first in yards per attempt out of play action in 24. Sam Darnold was second in 2025. So, like, the play action game, again, it's similar conversation with Stefanski. Is that Dart's strength right now? It's absolutely not, but it is something that needs to get better, and maybe an emphasis on fixing his footwork a little bit and getting that stuff can be a blessing for Jackson Dart. So I like him as offensive mind. There is personality questions, which you can't really see yet. You know, is he too even keeled? Does he have the command of the room type? But a lot of times these offensive coaches, you don't think that, and then they get their chance and they show that off, right? Like they're smart enough to know this is not my role. I'm not supposed to command the room with I'm not the head coach. I'm not trying to step on his toes. And then they do a better job when they get it. You know, Ben Johnson, that was a question of him. It's like, oh, is he this recluse who's a weird dude? And maybe he is a little bit of a weird dude, but like he's figured out a way to get that Chicago team led and fired up. So Kubiak is not the best like offensive mind where I'm like, this guy slam dunk, slam dunk. There's still questions I have about him, but he's certainly somebody I would be excited about taking a chance on.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is you're hoping that you're getting Shanahan with this, is kinda what you're
Yes,
looking.
absolutely, right? Like, under his dad, a Shanahan disciple, he worked under Kyle Shanahan, so there's roots there, the zone run game, so, like, there's just a clear identity on offense that he's gonna look to install, and hopefully that would work out for the Giants. Alright, next on this list, we're gonna look at Vance Joseph, the Broncos defensive coordinator, 53 years old. He's been the Broncos DC for the last 3 years after being the Cardinals DC for 4 seasons, and then before that, he was the Broncos head coach for 2 years, before he was the Dolphins DC. So, was the defensive coordinator in Miami when Joe Shane was there. Charlie Bullen, there's a connection there, worked under him in both Miami and Arizona. His head coaching tenure with the Broncos went very poorly, and he was 11-21. But his quarterbacks were Case Keenum, which was, the best QB he had, Trevor Siemian, Brock Osweiler, and Paxton Lynch. Uh, they ranked 24th with Keenum, 27th the year they had those other 3 guys. So they were certainly bad, but they weren't like 31st, 32nd in the NFL bad, which I do think means a little bit with those guys you had at quarterback. The issue I have with Joseph, and we'll talk about his style, is that one, the way he handled coordinators, and it felt like he was very much a John Elway yes man in Denver, is a question of can he be the head coach? Um, Defensively, he's aggressive as can be. There's some cool things that he does off the aggression that is different than the guys you think of like Brian Flores, Wink Martindale types. But I don't think there's anything besides just like his defense being really good with the Broncos that makes you go, okay, this is why this guy's the head coach, though.
Yeah, man, you nailed it. Vance Joseph to me looks like someone you'd love to have as a defensive coordinator, but, like, I don't think you'd want him in your I don't think that you wanna hire him as head coach just to get that. I don't think that it's that good that you need to have it that way, and I don't think that he's shown anything in his past as a head coach that makes me want to get him, and here's something that really super concerned me. You mentioned the quarterbacks that he had to deal with, and I'm not gonna hold him against having a record of 5-11 and then 6-10 with, like you said, Paxton Lynch, Brock Osweiler, Trevor Siemian, and Case Keenum. Here's the thing, though. In 2018, after having Lynch, Osweiler, and Simeon, which is probably the worst quarterback room I've ever seen, um, you have the number 5 overall pick, and you went Bradley Chubb over Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson in the same draft. Now, is that possibly that John Elway is terrible at talent value? It doesn't matter because to me, it worries me because you didn't pound the table and implore, like, I cannot win with this quarterback room, period. Like, it just, the fact that you went into the next year as Case Keenum is your starter is concerning, that you did not see that as being an issue that was going to severely impact your ability to be a head coach, that you just went ahead and just took Bradley Chubb. And the fact that you're a defensive coordinator by nature on top of it almost makes me even more worried that you're like, well, my defense will be so good, it'll be just fine. Now, I don't know any of that, but it's definitely speculation, but it's definitely a question I'm asking him in an interview.
Well, the issue is that Elway was totally running that, and I think it's lesser on the QB spectrum that you're looking at, but I think more so with the coordinators is like he just did whatever John Elway did. Like they brought in Mike McCoy, they fired him after 3-7. When it's like, yeah, they were bad, but it wasn't Mike McCoy's fault. They make Bill Musgrave the OC. They keep him for the next year. Joe Woods, who was his a defensive mind comes in, who's his defensive coordinator? Oh, it just happened to be the Broncos DB coach the 2 previous seasons when you weren't there. Um, so that is worrisome with that. But defensively, I don't want to go too much into the rankings. I do think his defense takes a little time, right? It's always kind of like bad the first year and then makes a big jump into year 2 and 3. Um, they've obviously been, third the back-to-back years with the Broncos, with the Cardinals. They were 12th and 10th one year and then 2 really bad years sandwich that. But what he does is he blitzes, right? You know, with the Broncos, and just as his defensive coordinator, 6th, 7th, and 5th in blitz rate. With the Cardinals, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 3rd. It's not as intense, like I said, as Wink or Flores defense, but they do similar things where they they send DBs, they send linebackers, lining guys up all along the line of scrimmage, challenging you, backing guys out. Here's where I think he's a little different is he does run a ton of man coverage, right? 4th highest rate behind the Browns, Lions, and Giants this year. But he runs cover 4 at the 10th highest rate and cover 6 at the 12th highest rate. Those usually aren't like mixed with the heavy blitz teams. So like there's something I kind of don't love that. We'll talk about that with Lou Anarumo, where I don't love that, but it certainly has worked with the Denver Broncos because they are a legit defense. They lead the league in sacks back-to-back years. They give a guy like Talofa Hufanga freedom to go out there and make plays, even though it bites them. They're physical with their DBs and put a lot of responsibility on the linebackers. But like, there's been no doubt success defensively for Vance Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, make no mistake about it. Like I said, his defense is definitely awesome. It's fun to watch. I think that that stuff's really, really cool that he's blitzing out of cover 4 and cover 6, and having a guy like Hafunga who can just kind of roam around the field and be a wrecking ball. I think that that stuff's exciting. I think that it forces. I think that's the way to coach defense is coach it like you have an offense. Just don't let a team go down there and do what they want to do. And we'll definitely get into this when we get to Lou Anarumo. I'm not a fan of like giving up yards and bending, not breaking. Like go out there and make them change what they like to do. Make the offense uncomfortable. Do not let a quarterback sit back and be comfortable. Make him have to think. Make him have to do things he's not used to be doing. And I think that Vance Joseph does a great job of doing that stuff. It's just like you said before, the guys that have head coaching experience are always going to have more negatives against them because for everybody else that has none of that, it's just a question mark for us. For this, there's palpable, tangible things that we can look and point at and be like, this is definitely wrong. And for me, if you're gonna be that guy, like you have to. I don't want a guy working with Joe Shane that isn't like sure of what he's doing and making good hires if you're coming in as a coordinator. And I don't get the sense with Vance Joseph that he's gonna be that guy and kind of lead Joe Shane in the direction that the team needs to go in and that he needs to go in to be successful. So I'm very lukewarm on Vance Joseph, but that says nothing of the actual defense that he runs.
All right, next on this list is Raheem Morris, the recently fired Falcons head coach who is 49 years old. He went 16-18 as the Falcons head coach, 2 8-9 seasons back to back. He was a former Bucks head coach from 2009 to 11. Before he got the Falcons job, he was the Rams defensive coordinator for 3 years. He's 33-49 as an intentional head coach, 37-56 if you include when he was the interim head coach when the Falcons fired Dan Quinn. Got to be very weird to be an interim head coach for a team, leave, and then come back and be the head coach. Uh, this is the guy who my research dropped my opinion of them the most because I was like, "Oh, man, the Falcons, they didn't have their quarterback situation was a mess with Cousins. He fell off injury-wise. I didn't like Penix. Now he's part of, the team that drafted Penix, but, like, I didn't think Mike Penix was good. 2 back-to-back seasons, 8 and 9. And then this is where I'm kinda off on him. The Falcons' defenses have been below average both years. They got a bunch of sacks. They started blitzing a lot more this year, but they've been to a below average defense this year. 19th in scoring, 14th in EPA per play. But he doesn't call the defensive plays for the Falcons, right? So they brought in Jimmy Lake, who was I feel like more of a buddy hire, right? Like he was the Rams assistant head coach for 1 year, so he came over from there, and you're like, "Oh, that's the connection." Because before that, he was a Washington head coach. Jimmy Lake, the last time he actually coached a position or a coordinator or whatever in the NFL was with Raheem Morris in the Bucs back in 2011. He was a DB coach, so I didn't like that. They bring in Joe Fulbrick, who was the good defensive coach, so they fired him and did that. Um, the Rams defenses weren't that good with him. They were ranked in his 3 years as Rams DC were ranked 19th, 21st, and 16th in points, 20th, 22nd, and 9th in EPA per play. It's hard to find what identity he has because it kind of changes year to year, which can speak to being malleable, but more so like what is your identity? Um, I just was like, I can't find the redeeming factors besides the fact that he went 8 and 9 back-to-back years. And it was a total disaster in Tampa, even though I don't hold that too much against him.
Yeah, I mean, the Tampa thing's a really long time ago. So I hear you there. No, definitely with the Jimmy Lake hire as defensive coordinator in 2024, definitely feels like a buddy hire. He also brings in Zach Robinson, who also just followed him over from the Rams as offensive coordinator. Um, I
Which I wanna see Zach Robinson get another chance somewhere. The only thing that weirds me out about Robinson is, like, the addiction to using the pistol, but, like, he is somebody who I think could be an underrated offensive mind in the NFL, even though he'll get the blame for Michael Penix not working out.
yeah.
Um, but, like, they put up a lot of yards and points with Cousins before he got injured.
Well, I think also, again, I know head coach, GM, these things are not necessarily the same, but you have to also wonder, and again, this is just something, if you're interviewing a guy, I'm definitely asking the question about, is about the entire drafting Michael Penix after bringing in Kirk Cousins thing. It's the kind of thing that when it works, you're like, that was brilliant. But when it predictably doesn't work, it does not look brilliant at all. You've pissed off the guy that you spend the money on, and you pissed away the draft capital on a guy that isn't good.
It made me I thought I railed against it. I thought it was extremely stupid. It made me so angry for people to be like, "Well," and again, there's different opinions, so, like, I'm not actually angry at people having a different opinion on football, but it was one of those things where I'm like, "Stop telling me it's a good investment." And even, like, when Penix for some people were taking victory laps of Penix after 2024 and 3 starts, where I'm like, "Well, you're victory lapping this? Like, that's kind of embarrassing." But even in that, like, say they look s do they look stupid now? It's like, yes, they paid Kirk Cousins a ton of money. He is getting paid all this money next year. If they wanted to draft Michael Penix, they could have just drafted Michael Penix. Drove me nuts. It's like, this will never look genius because you wasted money on Kirk Cousins when you drafted a 25-year-old rookie quarterback. Like, he should be ready to go fairly soon. You don't need to spend all this money on Kirk Cousins. It's not like they spent all this money on, like, Tom Brady and, like, this guy. This is a guy who's getting into the Super Bowl. It was Kirk Cousins who had one career playoff victory. Um, so it drove me nuts, and it looks even worse when Michael Penix doesn't work out. But again, I put that a little more on the GM than Raheem Morris, but, like, he was the head coach for that, and he gets blame as well on that too. It's just I couldn't find a good identity for him defensively. Like, 1 year they're bottom of the league of blitz, 1 year they're high, coverage usage varies. Like, so, like, it's one thing. Yeah, you could change and stuff, but to not call the plays in Atlanta and not go very well and firing guys, your offense being what it was. I just the Bucks. I don't want to go too far back into it, but forget, man. They finished out on a 10-game losing streak. They're giving up 35 points per game in that 10-game losing streak. I mean, it was bad. And the Bucks, what a weird hire that was. You remember how that happened, right?
With
Where
John Gruden getting, like, fired?
Yeah, John Gruden got fired 3 weeks after the season as a surprise. Raheem Morris had been promoted from DB to DC that offseason already. And then they're like, "Ah, you could just be the head coach. We're gonna fire Gruden and you be the head coach." So, it was a total mess. Guys actually quitting, missed tackles, like like
It
sometimes
is.
I think we give too much credit for like, "Oh, I didn't lose the locker room or stuff." Like, I think that's a little overblown. That doesn't happen as often. That was a true, like, this shit just fell
Yeah.
totally apart.
Yeah, I question the leadership ability from Raheem Morris personally. I'm just not sure I see it. It's also just weird, right? That this is probably a coincidence, but in 2009, they draft Josh Freeman from Kansas State, where he was the defensive coordinator.
Yeah. And again, he was a young coach. I'm not putting too much on, like, the QB
No,
position, especially for defensive
it's
coaches.
just weird. It's
Freeman had that 1 year where it was like, "Hey, they got a guy," and it just totally fell off a cliff. Um, but yeah, I've been to a couple of Josh Freeman games, big arm. Alright, next on this list, I want to, like, have some love for this guy and give him an opportunity, but it kinda bothers me, and it's Antonio Pierce. 47 years old, former Giants all-pro linebacker, was the Raiders head coach as an interim in 23 and then as the just full-on head coach in 24. Before we, like, break into Antonio Pierce, he didn't really get a fair shot with the Raiders. We'll talk about it even though he contributed to the mess there as well, and we'll even talk about the Arizona State stuff a little bit. Why do you take a year off? Like, it's kind of frustrating. Maybe he just doesn't really care about being a head coach or whatever in the NFL again, and that's all fair and good. I know he's taking an interview because he is a former Giant, but, like, it's kind of frustrating a guy with such little experience despite having a head coaching opportunity, just taking a year off like he was, a guy who had 10 years of head coaching experience. Like, he was one of the most inexperienced head coaches of all time. Like, what are we taking time off for?
it's very interesting, it's very frustrating, but also just his past in general. Like, how odd that he shows up to Arizona State as linebacker coach slash recruiter from 2018 and 19. Then he's the assistant head coach in 2021 and 2020 and recruiter in Arizona State.
And he got a lot of
And
trouble. I mean,
they had specifically recruiting allegations against them with this recruiting scandal, and I think he specifically was somehow
he
in
was
in
the
punished.
ringleader. Like, the other coaches blamed him. Like, he was like he pressured other coaches to get it. They were bringing recruits to the strip club, the gun range, and paying, getting them plane tickets and stuff like that. So, me personally,
It's just strange in general how he just shows up. He's the linebackers coach for 2 years, and then he's the assistant head coach and defensive coordinator. Like, he just flew up the charts.
well, that was Herm Edwards. Herm Edwards was trying to bring in all his guys, Marvin Lewis, like other NFL guys. That was a very Herm, and I didn't hate it at the time. I thought it was not a bad idea by Herm. And he's got that ability to connect with players. Like, that's the one thing is, like, he does have that ability to connect, command a locker room. The way what he did with the Raiders that first year as interim coach was pretty impressive.
Sure.
But that stuff can die out quick, right? You saw how quickly the Devontae Adams thing fell apart. Um, so that's just where, like, any part of it's trying to cover up the Plaxico shooting. So, like, me personally, I'm not
Mhm.
offended by, like, the recruiting stuff or any of that. Like, that doesn't make me blink at a guy like, "Oh, he's a bad guy," or whatever. I'm like, "Yeah, I'd like to have him in my corner." But it does just show, like, man, he when you're a head coach of the NFL team, man, you gotta be very buttoned up. You got big responsibilities. You can't do bullshit. You just can't do bullshit, um, like that. But I will say with the Raiders, 5-4 as interim head coach with Aiden O'Connell at QB is impressive. That was flat out impressive. He gets the job. They go 4-13. They had to make major shakeups that year, right? They hired Luke Getsy, then fired him, made Scott Turner the OC. They brought Norv Turner, off of the couch and, made him basically like the senior advisor, basically like helping run the offense with his son. Um, but they were so terribly talented. I mean, they had Minshew and O'Connell at quarterback. Alexander Madison was their leading rusher. They traded Devontae Adams. They got Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers both to 1,000-yard seasons. No talent on defense really either. And hey, look, you look at Pete Carroll, they go and get him a quarterback. They won less games this year. So he did not get a fair shot with the Raiders. And there could be a good head coach in him. It just, why'd you take a year off?
Yeah, I don't know that he's really doing all the right things. Um, I completely agree. I like that he did kind of bring in some senior guys to help him run things. When you watched him on the sidelines, it seemed very much like he was giving it seemed, I can only say it from the outside, seemed like he was doing a lot of the work within the week to get the other coaches to do their job, and he can just focus on managing the game, and they go in with a game plan, and he just lets his coaches coach, he runs the game, and that's how it goes, and it worked. It worked to success, and I think that there is definitely a head coach in him, but I don't think that he did the stuff to convince me since then that it's time for him to take over the reins of a disaster situation that the Giants sort of have, where you
Yeah, it'd
have
be an
to
embarrassing hire.
you'd have to build everything from the bottom up, and I don't think he's that guy.
He's not last in my power rankings. It'd be the most embarrassing hire that the Giants could make. Um, all right, next on the list, Lou Anarumo, Colts defensive coordinator, 59 years old. His nickname is the Mad Scientist. And as much as we probably don't want Anarumo, he is known for his mad test with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, and specifically in the playoffs. He's known for varying his coverages a ton. He's been the Colts DC for 1 year after the Bengals fired him after 6 years as their DC. Before that, he was the Giants DB coach under Pat Shermer in 2018, and then he was with the Dolphins for 6 years. Here's his connections to the Giants, and this is a big part. DB coach for the Giants in 2018, worked with Joe Shane for 6 years for the Dolphins. Um, Son Lewis is a pro scout for the New York Giants. He worked on a defensive staff with interim DC Charlie Bullen, and he's from Staten Island and reads the New York Post every morning. What more could you want out of a guy, Grump?
Well, you'd want some better defenses out of him.
Yeah, that's the issue with Lou Anarumo. Here's his defense's rankings going from 2019 to this most recent year. 25th, 22nd, 17th, 6th, 21st, 26th, 20th. Like, there's some I think Lou Anarumo is smart. I think with the right defensive pieces, he can still coach a top 10 defense in the NFL. He's not the issue with the Bengals. The Bengals did get worse without him. But you can't have that type of results and be hired as the head coach. Um, that's just a flat out reality of it. There is things that are bad about his defense, which we can talk about, but you just can't have that bad of defensive results and be a head coach. Like I said, the Antonio Pierce hiring would be embarrassing. This would be embarrassing too, because it's all those Giants connections that don't actually matter and not great results.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible that he's a good head coach and he's a good motivator of men, and maybe he just doesn't get it done on defense. Like maybe he's a hands-off head coach and he hires someone to run a defense because he does run a very diverse defense. It's just that it's never a strong one. I think that
Yes.
he gives up a ton of yards with a strategy that sort of prevents chunk plays, but you know, and he tries to make offenses work for points. Like you're going to have to dink a dunk and you're going to have to be perfect. Turnovers. Like you're going to have to execute, you know, 12 to 15 play drives if you want to score on us. And I understand that strategy. It's just A, I hate it. And B, the numbers show that it hasn't really done him many favors. And, you look back and there's not a whole lot of inspiring hires. James Betcher is probably the one name you'd even recognize off of that. And that's not an inspiring hire. The best thing I really can say about him is, you know, I've always felt that the Cincinnati Bengals have done a bad job as an organization in acquiring talent, and they've been ignoring holes, right? They've been ignoring stuff for years, and they continue to ignore it, and they're just going to keep going the way they're going to go, and they know better than me. So whatever, right? But when his defense, especially the defensive backfield, was loaded with a bunch of average talent with like a few above average guys back when he had Eli Apple, Jesse Bates, Von Bell, Chidobe Awuzie, Trey Flowers, Dax Hill, and Cam Taylor-Britt. He got the most out of all of those guys. So like I said, maybe inside of him, there is a head coach that can get the most out of guys, and maybe he's a hands-off guy where he doesn't need to run his defense and he can just be a head coach. I'm not willing to take that chance.
Yeah, and I think he is someone who needs to run his defense as well too. Like you said, uh, they were ranked 6th in 2022. The year before is when he really started making his name in that year in that playoff run, where like he was kind of the Mahomes stopper, right? And he held Josh Allen to 10 points in a playoff game. So like that little stretch there, he deserved a lot of credit. He was doing a lot of good things as the defense was as offenses defense were evolving to the offenses creating all these explosives. He did a great job, right? That infamous AFC Championship game with the Chiefs, where they just started rushing 3 and dropping 8, right? And when he does blitz, it's like 5-man rush, and he'll be in cover 4 out of it, which we mentioned with Vance Joseph, but if Joseph is like really putting a lot of pressure on you, Lou Anarumo is more sending a 5th guy and doing that. Therefore, becomes easy for offenses to just check down and take the play that's there. Um, and just quarterbacks have adjusted to what guys like Lou Anarumo do. So you can't just do that style. You have to perfect it to be at its best. And Lou Anarumo has not been able to do that. To his credit, like you mentioned, the Bengals, they let Jesse Bates go. Terrible mistake. They let DJ Reader go. Not not been able to replace him. They've drafted all these defensive players and they've all just sucked. So like it's not his fault that it went bad with the Bengals. It's just even when at his best wasn't a guy that you were yearning to have come and be your defensive coordinator. It was more games it's more like he did good against the best quarterbacks in the playoffs, which does count for something, but to be a head coach, you gotta get your team to the playoffs and be a really good team, so, um, hold on as I pull up notes for the next guy on the list because I wasn't we got 2 guys left. Alright, next, Grump, Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, interim head coach. Grump, we're at an hour, 46 minutes. We're not hiring Mike Kafka as the head coach.
I have a whole bunch of notes, and instead I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
hit him.
read
Hit me with them because I
I'm
don't
just
have
gonna read
notes.
what I wrote, and this is amazing to even say this. It's hard to say what Kafka is really, but he seems like a smart offensive mind. He's worked closely with this team, ownership, and the front office, and he likely knows Dart better than anyone else in the NFL right now. His temperament may not be very demanding from what we've seen, but he at least held players accountable without outwardly throwing them under the bus. It's hard to imagine him benefit from staying, though. His best chance, honestly, is probably just a change of scenery as a true offensive coordinator with the freedom to just run an offense that he thinks and creates on his own with all the lessons that he learned here and build his resume off of that. And I think eventually he can become a head coach somewhere else based off of that. Right here and right now doesn't feel right.
Yeah, and I'm not there's leadership things where I'm like, I don't know if he's got to lead the room. We even at the Senior Bowl, one of the talking points last year because he was running, is like, man, this is an inefficient practice. And we've seen a lot of Senior Bowl practices. That was one of the ones that was kind of bothersome. That there was what was the other coaching staff coach that we hated down there that was like wasting our time? There was one other.
I don't remember.
Can't remember who it was, but we were getting pissed off. It's like you were wasting so much time. So now I think Kafka's a smart guy. I think he adjusts very well offensively. I think he's a smart offensive mind. I think he's going to go be a good offensive coordinator for somebody else. Just it shouldn't be here. Um, and I think he'll use this time as interim head coach to learn from it. I really think he will. So he may be a guy who gets a chance at head coach, and I think he probably will. Will it work? I don't know, but I tweeted at him the other day. I was like, "Hey, 4 years. It's been a little tough. We never knew exactly what was yours and what was Dable's, but I enjoyed watching the film, bro, for the most part. Times where I was frustrated, but for the most part, I enjoyed. People hate offensive coordinators, Grump. I never felt hate for Mike Kafka, and it's a position where you're basically there to be hated or be the best in the NFL. Uh, and it would never felt that way. All right, we've hit the last guy on the list, and it is Rizzi, Darren Rizzi, 55 years old, special teams coordinator slash assistant head coach for the Broncos. From 2019 to 24, he was the Saints special teams coordinator. Was interim head coach for 1 year. Was the Dolphins special teams coordinator from 2011 to 2018. He does have head coaching experience at D2 New Haven and FCS Rhode Island. He went 18 and 23 at those 2 stops. He coached at Rutgers with Greg Schiano back in the day. Has some connections to the Giants. New Jersey. Went to Bergen Catholic. He's a New Jersey guy. He worked with Shane from 2009 to 2016. Uh, we just mentioned Klint Kubiak about like his job with the Saints. I think he actually did a pretty decent job as an interim head coach. he's the type of guy you make the interim head coach who's going to raw get you fired up, right? He went 3-5, but they started out 3-1 before Derek Carr got injured, and then they went 0-4 down the stretch. So high energy, people, people fall on the side, both sides when they see a coach ream out a player, but he's not afraid to do that type of stuff. Um, Brian Leonard, former Rutgers player, is one of the few guys who can motivate him to get the pads back on. He's a big jokester. Jokes about taking huge dumps. We are not hiring the special teams coordinator from New Jersey, Grump.
It's really hard to say about him, right? Because it's really difficult to know anything about a special teams
Agreed.
coordinator.
We're just not giving him the chance. We did that with Joe Judge. We might even be doing it with Joh Harbaugh. We're not doing that for the New Jersey guy who spent time with Joe Shane at Miami.
I mean, that's the part that's the most concerning, is that he has a connection directly to Joe Shane. That's what's scary. He must have some level of ability to command and respect the locker room, or some level of football acumen, because he was consistently pegged as an assistant head coach. He was a head coach at low college level. My concern is, at the low college level, he was sucked as a head coach. Like, just the record wise, it's just terrible. Um, you listed the overall record. Almost all of those wins came at 1 year.
He was like 500 at New Haven, and then he sucked at Rhode Island.
Yeah.
The record. I didn't go and watch the film of that, but
No, I didn't either. He kind of bounced around with a shared connection to Tony Sparano in Miami, and then, wound up in New Orleans, and then, followed Sean Payton. So he clearly makes an impact on the people around him, or he just knows how to rub the right elbows. I'm not sure, but I don't think that at the NFL, well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It's one of those two. I think that he probably is able to motivate some people. I'm just, again, the Giants, in a certain situation, when Tom Coughlin is retiring and you have a lot of pieces in place and you just need a new head coach, or whatever, retiring, contract ending, you know what I mean? That's a time where maybe you really heavily consider a guy like Darren Rizzi to come in here and just pick up what Tom Coughlin left behind and keep motivating guys and make the right hires and let it go. Right now, where you have some roster pieces in place, you got a GM on the hot seat, and you have to hire completely new offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Wrong time, wrong place.
yeah, maybe one day he gets a chance and deserves it, but it's not this time with the Giants. I would love for him to be my special teams coordinator, but it's just not happening. All right, dude, we did it. We broke down every Giants coach candidate interview. As this moment, the Steelers just got blown out. So maybe Mike Tomlin becomes one, maybe Jesse Minter becomes one. But as of now, Grump, we do have 11. And we must reveal our rankings. So we're going to reveal our 6 through 11, and then we'll go through our top 5. My 6 through 11 is I have Vance Joseph at 6, Kafka 7, Lou Anarumo 8, Darren Rizzi 9, Antonio Pierce 10, and then Raheem Morris 11. I really thought Raheem Morris might sneak into my top 5 and ended up with him at 11. What do you got for your 6 through 11? Muted.
I broke these down into like little groups where guys are clumped closer together and where they're further apart, if that makes sense. So I have 6 is very far below 5 for me. I'll start right there. And it goes Vance Joseph, Mike Kafka, Raheem Morris, and then really close together is there's a gap there, and then really close together is Antonio Pierce, Lou Anarumo, and Darren Rizzi.
Yeah, I think we're kind of similar, where Kafka or Joseph is our 6. And I have a gap between 6 and 5. I also have a gap between 6 and 7 as well too. So, all right. So my top 5 is Joh Harbaugh 1, Chris Shula number 2, Klint Kubiak number 3, Mike McCarthy number 4, and Kevin Stefanski number 5. I am like you, where I have clumps. Harbaugh clear number 1. Shula and Kubiak kind of interchangeable for me. I just think Shula is a better head coach overall. And then McCarthy, Stefanski, if you tell me I'm wrong about having McCarthy over Stefanski, I'm not going to argue too much with you.
Yeah. So I mean, we have almost identical stuff here. Identical. So John Harbaugh,
Identical.
John Harbaugh. That's number 1 and number 2 for me. But yeah, clear number 1, and then a gap, and then I have very close together, but in order: Chris Shula, Klint Kubiak. Then I have Kevin Stefanski. Then I have Mike McCarthy, and then I have the big gap before at Vance Joseph.
Let's fight to the death over Mike
I will
McCarthy and Kevin.
kill you.
Who would have thought that, two guys who share a lot of vision and do a podcast together would agree on something?
It is funny because we did not really talk about any of this stuff other than the structure of the show all day, all weekend, none of that.
Yeah,
We wound up with
we
basically the same stuff.
and we've for the most part, we don't talk too much. We're like, "Hey, this is my plan. This is what we kind of." This was like I said, like you said, we went blind opinion wise. Like I think we both knew what we thought of Harbaugh, but John Harbaugh, John Harbaugh. But outside of that, it was very blind. So, all right. The longest episode in GNS/TG history that's not a 4th of July mailbag or the special, content creator collab
E3 of the
episode.
draft.
So, cool beans. Got it. I'm excited for it to be done, even though I think it'd be funny if like the Giants are going to interview 4 more people. I'm like, son of a bitch. So I want to start getting into Senior Bowl stuff and getting ready for that. Now I'm fully ready for them to hire a head coach. So appreciate you guys. If you listen to the end, we love you. If you didn't listen to that, I'm gonna be honest, I don't love you. If you did not listen to that, I do not love you, and you're never gonna hear this.
If you listen to the end, promo code Harbaugh for 10% off of the Patreon store.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, we should 99% off, and then someone will tweet it out. John Harbaugh. All right, that's an episode. We will see you guys Friday at the latest, if news breaks earlier than that. Until then, let's go Big Blue.